A new report found America's national debt now exceeds $123 trillion. That's 4 times the U.S. Treasury Department's figure of $28 trillion. What does that mean in terms of taxpayer dollars? Arizona Attorney General Mark Brnovich says he is disturbed by efforts to expand the number of justices on the Supreme Court. He writes to his state senators, urging them to oppose the plan. And the Supreme Court has dramatically increased its support for religious freedom under the newest Chief Justice. A report says it's the most pro-religion court since the 1950s. Tune into Deep Dive as we explore these topics and more. Hello and welcome. This is Deep Dive and I'm Tiffany Meier. More pushback against court packing after House Democrats introduced a proposal to expand the number of justices from 9 to 13. Arizona Attorney General Mark Brnovich wrote the letter to the state's Democratic senators. He tells them that the Constitution creates a unique set of checks and balances to defend against tyranny, and packing the court breaks that balance by directly assaulting judicial independence. Brnovich says history shows that past attempts to expand the court haven't been noble. He says, in fact, these misguided actions have almost always attempted to bypass the principles of the Constitution in a quest for more power. Brnovich notes that even the late liberal Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg opposed the idea. So does current liberal Justice Stephen Breyer. Brnovich's letter comes as House Democrats introduced a proposal to expand the number of justices from 9 to 13. Expanding the court by 4 seats would give Democrats just enough seats to overcome the court's conservative majority. Nancy Pelosi says she does not have plans to take up the proposal, but President Joe Biden created a commission to study making changes to the Supreme Court. And Pelosi says she is waiting for that commission to make recommendations. Speaking of the Supreme Court, a new report found the country's highest court has dramatically increased its support for religious freedom under the newest Chief Justice. Legal scholars Lee Epstein and Eric Posner Jr. wrote in the latest edition of the University of Chicago Supreme Court Review, quote, "The Roberts Court has ruled in favor of religious organizations far more frequently than its predecessors, over 81% of the time, compared to about 50% for all previous eras since 1953. Adding a statistical analysis suggests that this transformation is largely the result of changes in the court's personnel. A majority of Roberts Court justices are ideologically conservative and religiously devout, a significant break from the past. From 1953 until John Roberts became Chief Justice, religious organizations won their cases 50% of the time. Now, under Roberts Court, they've won over 80% of the time. The report says most religious cases won today are by mainstream Christian organizations. Before, they say marginalized or minority groups were favored, especially what they called dissenting Christian denominations. During Chief Justice Warren Burger's term, cases were decided in favor of religious freedom 51.4% of the time, while under Chief Justice William Rehnquist, that percentage increased to 58.1%. The trend has influenced the court's liberal wing as well. Justice Elena Kagan, at 75%, ranks as the 8th most favorable to religious freedom among all of the justices since 1953. 93 cases and over 820 opinions from 31 justices were studied. Chief Justice John Roberts has led the court since being named to the position in 2005 by President George W. Bush. The study found that compared to previous eras in the court's history, a series of major decisions in the last 2 years has almost doubled the frequency of support for the First Amendment's free exercise clause, guaranteeing the right to practice religion and assemble for its expression without government interference. Now let's talk money, particularly national debt. The phrase trillions of dollars has been in the news a lot lately. Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID relief package is over $2 trillion infrastructure plan and his $1.52 trillion proposal for spending. Where is all that money coming from? And now there's new trillions, this time in national debt. While the infrastructure is going to be paid for by corporate taxes, Biden unveiling his plan to raise corporate taxes from 21 to 28%. What does that mean in terms of taxpayer dollars? A new report found America's national debt now exceeds $123 trillion. That's 4 times the U.S. Treasury Department's figure of $28 trillion. The U.S. Treasury's official figure is $28.1 trillion by the end of March this year, and around $23 trillion last year. Chicago-based nonprofit Truth in Accounting Financial State of the Union 2021 report found spendings related to the pandemic and lockdowns added $10 trillion last year. So how does that relate to taxpayer burden? Well, $123 trillion means close to $800,000 per taxpayer, while the official figure of $28 trillion means around $180,000 per taxpayer. And so why are the numbers so different? The report states our measure of the government's financial condition includes reported federal assets and liabilities, as well as promised but not funded Social Security and Medicare benefits. The report includes a breakdown of total debt. Around $55 trillion went to Medicare benefits, over $41 trillion went to Social Security promises, $21 trillion in publicly held debt. That means debt held by individuals, corporations, state or local governments, Federal Reserve banks, foreign governments, and other entities outside the United States government. Less federal financing bank securities, and over $9 trillion in military and civilian retirement benefits. Over $2 trillion in other liabilities. And so all of that adds up to around $129 trillion. According to the report, the total debt equates to a $796,000 burden for every federal taxpayer, almost $800,000. Because the federal government would need such a vast amount of money from taxpayers to cover this debt, it received an F grade for its financial condition. That's according to the report. Treasury officials don't include unfunded benefits because they claim recipients have no right to future payments, only to those under current entitlement laws. Now, it might seem that the U.S. has been in trillions of debt for ages, but it wasn't until 1981 that the U.S. accumulated the first $1 trillion of cumulative national debt. So what have the responses been? Representative Jason Smith criticized new spending proposals from President Joe Biden and congressional Democrats. He wrote in a March 31st statement, Washington Democrats are embracing a historically disturbing appetite for spending. They just passed a nearly $2 trillion bailout bill. President Biden is now proposing they turn right back around and cut a check for another $2 trillion to spend on a massive grab bag of policies, all tied together with talking points. Yet all the while, the president reportedly has yet another $2 trillion spending proposal in his back pocket, awaiting its own news cycle. Smith is the budget panel's ranking minority member. And campaign strategists and nonprofit activists say there needs to be serious attention to get the debt under control. Former communications director to Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, Jim Manley, told the Epoch Times that at some point both parties are going to have a serious negotiation regarding the need to get our fiscal house in better order, and that includes both taxes and spending. But I don't see that happening anytime soon because our politics are just too toxic. Truth in Accounting President Sheila Weinberg tells the Epoch Times it is not reasonable to depend upon future economic growth to solve the debt problem. She goes on to note that the Treasury Department agrees. She says the authors of the financial report of the U.S. government have deemed that under current law and policy, a massive implied increase in the ratio of reported debt to GDP, e.g. future debt will be growing faster than GDP, is simply unsustainable. In other words, under current law and policy, we can't grow our way out of this, especially considering Medicare grows faster than inflation. But Chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, disagrees. He pushed back on warnings about a rising federal budget deficit and national debt. The numbers went up due to an aggressive response to the pandemic. Powell said on April 14th, there is no question of our ability to service and issue that debt for the foreseeable future. But he warned the national debt is growing meaningfully faster than the U.S. economy. He says that's by definition unsustainable over time. It's a different thing to say that the current level of the debt is unsustainable. It's not. Adding, we will have to eventually get back to a sustainable path. That is something that is best done in very good times when the economy is at full employment and when taxes are rolling in. This is not the time to prioritize that concern. In other words, that's his opposite approach. Powell's comments sparked lots of responses. Senator Rick Scott put out a statement saying they are lying in public while privately worrying about the issue. It's a disgusting betrayal of the trust of the American people. When inflation rises, the prices of everyday goods go up. adding it is time for Biden to acknowledge this threat is real, understand that his reckless spending has consequences, and address the risk of runaway inflation now. Former White House trade advisor Peter Navarro also went after Powell's comments on inflation and globalization. He said on Steve Bannon's show War Room, the people who control this government, whether the Democrats or Republicans, think that whenever your wages go up, they are going to ship your jobs offshore. And he called Powell the worst Fed chair in modern history. Now let's turn to an overview of the rise in debt to GDP ratio. According to this graph, it skyrocketed to almost 140% last year. The shades represent recessions, the most major recent increase, the financial crisis of 2008. Federal debt held by the public reached over 100% last fiscal year, but that's not the first time this happened. The last time was just after World War II. But this time there's no major financial or military crisis. The Congressional Budget Office now projects the federal debt will be 107% of GDP by 2031, the highest level in U.S. history. Now, are Biden officials actually wary of inflation? A New York Times article revealed that Biden administration officials are wary of the inflation threat, while they publicly defy warnings about a 1970-style escalation in wages and prices that could cripple the economy. According to the New York Times, the White House is planning to dispense the money for the proposed $2.3 trillion infrastructure package gradually enough not to stoke further price increases right away. According to Labor Department data on April 13th, prices have begun to rise at their fastest pace since 2012. The Consumer Price Index rose 0.6% in March, more than expected. Half of the increase was driven by a 9.1% jump in gas prices. Overall, consumer prices were up 2.6% from a year ago. That's the fastest pace since August of 2018. The Fed's recent inflation projection rose to 2.4% this year, up from 1.8% projected earlier. But officials expect inflation to return to 2% next year, indicating that inflationary pressures will be temporary. But what do you think? Let me know below. Thanks for tuning in to Deep Dive. I'm Tiffany Meier, and see you soon.